Good morning. Thank you for joining us today in the launch of the Kroc Institute's fifth comprehensive report titled The Colombian Final Agreement in the Era of COVID-19, Institutional and Citizen Ownership is Key to Implementation. My name is Asher Kaufman and I'm the director of the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame. The Peace Accords Matrix and its Barometer initiative are key initiatives within the Institute, and since 2016 have been serving as impartial monitors of the implementation of the Colombian Peace Agreement. Our mandate is stipulated in the 6th chapter of the Accord, including a directive to create a methodology to follow implementation, to produce public records, to provide technical support for implementation agencies, and to be as helpful as possible in sharing factual and evidence-based information about the status of implementation. This year, the launch of our report coincides with a deep political, economic, and social crisis in Colombia. We are convinced that implementation of the agreement, including its provisions focused on democratic participation and building the necessary legal frameworks, can serve as tools in creating positive paths forward. Together with our partners in this work, Pastoral Social, Caritas Colombiana, we present this report with deep gratitude to the Accord signatory parties and with the hope that it will be useful to all Colombian citizens and the international community who are committed to peace building and the work of reconciliation and building more just societies. And on a personal note, I would like also to thank our team in Colombia and at Notre Dame who have worked tirelessly for months on end on producing this very significant and comprehensive report. I will now turn to Gerard Martin, the Peace Accords Matrix representative in Colombia, who will take it from here. Gerard, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Kaufman, for your opening remarks. Good morning to all of you here on the webinar and those who are joining us on Facebook. My name is Gerard Martin, and I'm the representative in Colombia of Kroc Institute's Peace Accords Matrix, and I will be your moderator today during this webinar. It's a pleasure to gather with all of you and discuss the central findings and messages of our fifth comprehensive yearly report about the state of implementation of the final peace agreement in Colombia. This report covers the period from December 2019 to November 2020, and as mentioned by Professor Kaufman, bears the following title: Colombia's Final Agreement in the Era of COVID-19. Institutional and citizen ownership is key to implementation. We will start this webinar with a video we specially prepared for this launch. The video presents the principal findings and messages of our fifth comprehensive report. After the video, we have a wonderful panel to dive deeper into the central findings of the report. And after that, we will answer some of the questions some of you have already sent our way through the internet, and others that are coming in during this webinar. Some housekeeping rules: please use the Q&A function on your screen to send us further questions. Also, the materials shown during the webinar, including the video, the PowerPoint, and the report, are available on the Kroc Institute's website. The link to the page will be available on your screen, also in the Q&A function. Just to let you know that we don't have yet a full English version of the report, but we do have an executed summary in English, which will also be on our website. The full Spanish version of the report and the additional materials in Spanish are also available on our website. Without further ado, let's now have a look at the video with the main findings and messages of the fifth report. The video will last about 5 minutes.
4 years after the signing of the Colombian Peace Agreement, implementation continues to advance with a focus on achieving medium and long-term goals. In the midst of great challenges, both implementing parties and the general public are playing an increasingly active role in its implementation. This is highlighted by the Kroc Institute in its 5th comprehensive report, The Colombian Final Agreement in the Era of COVID-19, Institutional and Citizen Ownership is Key to Implementation. This report analyzes the period between December 2019 and November 2020 through a quantitative and qualitative outline of the implementation of provisions within the text of the agreement. Most of the short-term commitments were completed in the first 2 years of implementation. During the 3rd and 4th years, efforts have focused on promoting institutional coordination to advance participatory planning processes and to guarantee implementation at the territorial level. In 2020, implementation faced 2 major challenges. First, the persistence of insecurity in numerous territories of the country, continuing attacks against people in the process of reincorporation, and an increase in homicides against human rights defenders and social and environmental leaders. Second, the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic led to restrictions on mobility and heightened inequality and vulnerability in the territories, even while illustrating the resilience of these same communities. 4 years after the signing of the agreement, the data shows that implementation status saw the following changes. Full provisions moved from 26% to 28%. Provisions in the intermediate phase increased from 16% to 18%. Provisions in the minimum phase remained at 35%, and uninitiated provisions were reduced from 24% to 19%. Point 1 and Point 5 saw the highest percentage of provisions was implementation began during this period, while Point 4 completed the most provisions. For the 3rd consecutive year, the greatest delays were observed in Point 2, as well as in the regulatory adjustments necessary for implementation of the agreement. The report highlights numerous actors at the local, national, and international levels that have taken ownership of the commitments within the agreement and have promoted implementation to overcome the causes prolonging armed confrontations. In 2020, new territory administrations incorporated commitments from the agreement into their municipal and departmental development plans, especially in PD regions. Similarly, judicial authorities have illustrated that the judiciary can be decisive in implementation of the agreement. The report also highlights that implementing entities focus on actions aimed at meeting the goals of the framework plan for implementation. As in previous years, the international verification component and the international community made important contributions to implementation of the agreement's commitments. In its review of the cross-cutting approaches, the report outlines efforts to keep the ethnic and gender foci active, even though the pace of implementation of provisions within these approaches still remains slower than the pace of general implementation. The report also includes an international comparative analysis. This section highlights the work of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace that has carried out the amnesty's resolution process at a faster speed than other countries implementing a similar process. The 7 macro cases opened by this jurisdiction are progressing at the average rate for similar cases in other countries implementing comprehensive peace agreements. In order to advance implementation, it is important to guarantee resources for the implementation of the agreement's commitments in the departmental and municipal development plans, and to affirm the territorial peace and reconciliation councils as the authority for dialogue and building consensus. It is also vital to focus efforts on meeting the goals within the framework plan for implementation that should be completed in 2021. During this period, there were still gaps in the issuance of the legal framework necessary to comply with provisions in the final agreement. It is urgent to build and execute a legal implementation agenda. Successful fulfillment of the agreement will require that the ambitious structural and institutional reforms are accompanied by transformations that are felt at the individual and community levels. In accordance with its mandate, the Kroc Institute continues to monitor implementation, accompanying and supporting the people, institutions, and organizations committed to ending conflict and building a stable and lasting peace in Colombia.
Okay, we hope you found the video instructive. The video will be available on our website, so please feel free to use it for instructional purposes and to spread the message about the status of implementation of the Peace Accord in Colombia. Now, to discuss the findings and messages more in depth, I'm joined by a wonderful panel of colleagues. Let me briefly introduce them to you. Josefina Echavarria Alvarez, our Director of the Peace Accords Matrix at the Kroc Institute. Danielle Cano, the Strategic Relationship Leader for the Barometer Initiative in Colombia. Patrick McQuestion, Research Associate with the Peace Accords Matrix. And Brenda Forero, the Reports Editor for the Barometer Initiative. Okay, let's start, Josefina, with a general question about the report. Can you please tell us about the reporting period and the context of this fifth report?
Yes, thank you very much. I hope everyone is having a good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We have here in front of us the fifth comprehensive report. It is important when we speak about the context to make clear that we are not talking about the current context that we're facing in Colombia, where there are so many protests, etc. But we're talking about the context of the year 2020. And we can see already some of the phenomena that we're witnessing today that was nascent developments already in the year 2020. But what we're speaking about specifically is what was the context that we were all facing, that we were all going through in the year 2020, and that of course impacted our lives and therefore also implementation. We have identified two phenomena in this context. The first one is the COVID-19 pandemic, and the second one is the persistence of insecurity in the country. When we speak about the COVID-19 pandemic, we're not only referring to a context in which we have a lot of health concerns. We, of course, have a health system that has really collapsed in the country, but we're also speaking about the restrictions on mobility that were imposed to outweigh that terrible disease that is still with us until today. And these restrictions also had a series of effects, especially on political participation. The second element in the context that we're looking at in the year 2020 is the worsening of armed confrontations and the persistence in the assassinations of social leaders, ex-combatants, massacres, forced recruitment, forced displacement. This is very important because this persistence of insecurity created a lot of uncertainty around the situation in general, but specifically about implementation. We have a high concentration and volatility of violence in some of the regions we're looking at. Many of them are well known in prioritized implementation areas like Catatumbo, Guaviare, El Sur de Bolívar, El Bajo Cauca, and obviously Chocó. At the same time, during the year 2020, we have a very positive development in the context of implementation, and that is a key opportunity that we wanted to identify and bring to the attention of all our listeners and audience here, which is the new administrations. We have since the 1st of January 2020, not only new mayors and new governors in Colombia, but each one of the new municipal councils and departmental chambers, but we also have the opportunity through new development plans that last until the year 2023 to incorporate a lot of the commitments of the final accord of 2016.
Thank you, Josefina. And to stay with you, what are some of the main novelties of this fifth report that you produced?
Well, we have been really trying to produce much more real-time information and share this not only with implementation agencies, but also with the general population and the citizens, both in Colombia and outside of Colombia, that are committed to the implementation of the peace agreement. So since the beginning of this year, we have started with publishing bi-monthly reports. These reports, as its name implies, cover the period of 2 months. So we're able to do a much more detailed contextualization and discussion about these particular 2 specific months. At the same time, this adds already to our specialized reports. We have 3 gender reports, so 3 reports in which we only look at the implementation of the gender commitments, and 1 special ethnic report. So 1 report that we launched at the end of January this year, where we look at the way in which the ethnic approach and the ethnic chapter has been implemented so far. This year, in this 5th comprehensive report, we are also including a few novelties. So we have this so-called PMI. These are the first letters of the framework for implementation. This is a general framework that was agreed in 2017, which is in a way how the public administration in Colombia is trying to implement the peace agreement. And we have in this report not only an explanation of how the implementation in the year 2020 was progressing in relation to our own PAM methodology, but we're also giving to everyone a comparison and showing how in this framework for implementation progressed during 2020. This gives all the implementation agencies an incredible platform for communication, for dialogue, for clarification, to make us aware of maybe what are the things that need to be further strengthened and what are those that are working well according to the framework plan. And a second novelty that we have this year in the comprehensive report is that we have a whole legal framework for analysis that we have developed since last year with our team. So in the report, you will find chapter by chapter, approach by approach of implementation, and at the end, a summary of what are the legal decisions that we need to move forward in order to create positive cascading effects in the implementation of the final agreement. And of course, we do have our international comparative analysis, which is one of the features that differentiates the Kroc Institute reports.
Thank you, Josefina. A little bit more on the last one. Can you please explain more in detail what this international comparative analysis provides in this report, how we can see the Colombian situation in comparative perspective?
Yes, so we work at the Peace Accords Matrix, looking at the way that in which more than 30 peace agreements around the world have been implemented since 1989. This gives us a unique understanding of the implementation process, but also of the very categories or provisions or commitments that we find in peace agreements and the way that they can be implemented in a more efficient way, in a much more direct manner, so that we can really achieve the main objective of any peace agreement, which is not only to end confrontations, but also to build positive peace. So what we're looking at this particular year is in Colombia, we have an integral system for justice, for transitional justice. It has 3 entities. One of those entities is called the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. This is an entity that really makes transitional justice decisions about individuals who might have participated during the war and has the potential to really have this legal status. So what we did is that we looked for ways of comparing similar tribunals in other post-accord contexts. So in other countries in which there had been an agreement signed between a government and an internal illegal armed group. And we looked at tribunals that were deciding upon the amnesties. What we found are 2 main, very interesting insights. The first one, as you can see here in our presentation, is that in comparison to other cases, the decisions on individual amnesties by the Special Jurisdiction for Peace in Colombia is advancing at even a faster pace compared to other international examples. What does this mean? It means that in many of the other countries, including El Salvador, including Guatemala, in Latin America, what we see is that the decisions about the amnesties of the individual cases, where you have more than 80 or 90% were collectively demobilized, are advances more or less at a speed of 8 years was the average in which the courts required to make those decisions. When we look at collective cases, so in Colombia, we have the so-called macro cases, in which we have 7 cases that bring together a great amount of people who are seeking justice. And of course, we're talking about restorative justice mechanisms. And what we also find is if we look at over 130 cases in our database, we find that these macro cases, if they continue advancing in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th year of implementation, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace in Colombia is actually acting at an average speed when we look at the international experience. To bring all this to the point, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace compared to other international similar tribunals is not falling behind. If we are able to continue a full implementation of point 5 of the agreement, which is the victim's point, we are very optimistic that this will also be come to a very good end, and we will be able to have an excellent implementation rate if things continue the way they have so far.
Well, that's definitely a positive message, an important message for the transitional justice system in Colombia. Let me now turn to Brenda Forero, our reports editor. Brenda, what kind of methodology does the Kroc Institute and its barometer initiative in Colombia use to monitor the implementation of the peace accord?
Yes, as Josefina explained, BAM researchers have developed a quantitative methodology to track the progress of the peace accord implementation. The BAM database serves as a valuable tool for analysis, which the Kroc Institute uses to support the negotiation and implementation of peace accords, including the Colombian Peace Accord. So, together with the National Secretariat of Pastoral Social Caritas Colombiana, the Kroc Institute created in 2016 the Barometer Initiative to monitor the implementation of the final agreement in real time. This initiative incorporated innovations that were not included in BAM's methodology in order to comply with the request of the signatory parties to follow up and verify the implementation of the Colombian agreement. So the BAM team created a specific methodology to monitor the implementation of 578 stipulations, which are defined as concrete, observable, and measurable commitments found in the accord. These stipulations were subdivided into 18 themes and 70 sub-themes and grouped within the 6 points included in the agreement. That methodology also analyzes the implementation of the territorial, ethnic, and gender dimensions of the accord. The number of stipulations is based on coding the text of the final agreement in consultation with the members of the Commission for monitoring, promoting, and verifying the implementation of the final agreement, known as the CIVI. And to monitor and validate all data collected, the Barometer Initiative has a team specialized in gathering, analyzing, and communicating information on the status of implementation. In Colombia, a team of researchers and experts gathers information and monitors implementation in coordination with the parties to the agreement, implementing agencies, civil society, social leaders in rural territories, the SACIBI and other forums created by the Accord, representatives of the international community, among others. And also researchers located at the Kroc Institute focus on quantitative analysis of the information obtained in Colombia. This information is kept in a qualitative database that by November 2020 contained 20,000 of implementation events. So based on the information collected, the researchers assign a score of 0 to 3 to each stipulation to indicate its level of implementation. So 0 means that the stipulation has not been initiated. 1 means that the stipulation has reached a minimum level of implementation. 2 means that the stipulation has reached an intermediate level of implementation. And 3 means that the stipulation has been fully implemented or completed. With this, the project teams prepares annual comprehensive reports, recently by monthly briefs and other briefs about different topics describing implementation progress. And about the elaboration process of comprehensive reports, I would say that this process reflects what a teamwork is. Both the Colombian-based team of researchers and the team and researchers located at the Kroc Institute work very hard to monitor, analyze, and validate data obtained in the field. Also fundamental is the guidance and direction of the leadership team, our manager, our director, and the entire Kroc Institute PAM team in this process. And as you are seeing in the slide, for example, for the elaboration of this report, we have 1,418 reports by 173 organizations, 433 press articles from 44 media outlets, 150 interviews with civil societies, CIVI, and other forums created by the agreement, government actors, and other relevant actors, and participation in more than 20 events related to the agreement implementation.
Thank you, Brenda, for that overview of the methodology. Clearly, a lot of work and rigor goes into these reports. Let me now turn to Daniel Cano, our strategic relationship leader of the Barometer Initiative in Colombia. Danny, can you please provide us with the main findings of the fifth report?
Sure, Gerard. In this report, we wanted to highlight 6 main findings. The first one is that despite the ongoing challenges that Josefina mentioned already, 4 years after the signing of the peace agreement, implementations continue to progress. And this is a good news. And it's been focusing mainly in the long and medium term commitments. And this is an important landmark if we take in consideration that getting into the 5th year of the implementation, we hasn't resumed conflict as it happens in other contexts around the world. A second finding has to do with the progresses, and we identified that the most significant progress occurred especially in point 1, 4, and 5, as we're gonna see later on during this presentation. But we have a concern which is related to the third message, is that for the 3rd consecutive year, point 2, which is related to political participation, and also the legal framework for the implementation continues to display significant delays. And this is critical for the implementation, especially the political participation side is very important in the actual context that the country is experiencing. It has been mentioned by Asher, but also is important the legal framework. And just to give you an example, if we have, for example, one law which is aimed to approve or increase civil society participation that is needed and is included with the peace agreement, we're going to be able to move forward with 10 different commitments. So this is the level of importance of this legal framework for the general progress of the implementation. So we have examples for each point during the report. The 4 main finding has to do with the 3 aspects of factors that affected the implementation rhythm. The first one is the technical planning and consolidation procedures needed to implement complex processes of the implementation, like the development plans with the territorial approach. But also a second aspect is that the sequencing of the peace agreement itself implies that not all the implementation has to occur in the first years. This is a 15 to 20 years process, and everything has to go through a specific schedule. However, if we analyze the previous years of the implementation, we identify that there are some indicators that are already behind and need to be prioritized in order to reduce those difficulties and not generate negative cascades in the next years. The fifth message is that, as Josefina mentioned, 2020 was a year for growing institutional and citizen ownership, and we saw this mainly in the incorporation of different commitments of the peace agreement within the development plans of the new mayors and governors, and this is very important, and also the initiatives of civil society to continue maintain their participation in the implementation of the peace agreement as a whole. And finally, we identify a very interesting aspect during the last year, and it was decisions made by judicial bodies like the HEP that affected implementation in a positive way. So these judicial decisions move forward the implementation, specifically in relation to security mechanisms to protect former combatants for the violence that they have been experiencing.
Thank you, Danielle. Now that we're diving into the details of the report, don't hesitate, please, to send questions to the Q&A function here on the webinar. And also we're looking at Facebook, and so you can also post questions there. Let me turn to Patrick McQuestion, Research Associate with the Peace Accords Matrix on campus. Patrick, how much did implementation of the final accord progress during 2020 as covered by this fifth report?
Thanks, Gerard, for that question. It's hard to answer in a few words, and actually this report goes into a lot of detail. But generally speaking, we saw that there were minimal increases since 2019. Of the 578 stipulations that we monitor, we see that 2% moved to intermediate levels and another 2% were completed. And there was an additional 5% of initiation of stipulations. The minimal category didn't shift in numerical terms, but there was definitely movement behind the scenes. So this raised a lot of questions for us. In the report, we go into this, and Danielle mentioned what could be occurring. And we found these the three major categories that Danielle was pointing out. The first one related to the planning and design that goes into a lot of these commitments and the preparation that it requires for plans like PEDET or the national plans. A second category are these non-initiated or low-level stipulations that follow a sequence. So the transitional justice mechanism, for example, is going at a reasonably quick pace, but the nature of the processes that entails hasn't allowed certain stipulations to move forward. And then finally, this third category of legislative reforms, for example, or other institutional key institutions like the National Commission for Security Guarantees that are still sort of lagging behind what we were expecting. These following graphics show the gender and ethnic approaches. We found in the report, we go into more detail, but that these approaches are generally lagging behind general implementation. So in ethnic, we see about a 15% lag, while in gender, we see a little smaller lag of about 11% compared to general implementation. The report also shows point by point the progress that was made from 2019 to 2020. So here we just highlight that in point 1, we saw the amount of non-initiated stipulations decrease, which is a good sign, as well as in point 4. And then we also saw an important increase in completed stipulations in point 4 related to the drug prevention programs. And finally, we, in our quantitative analysis, we also break down the plan, the framework implementation plan that Josefina mentioned at the beginning too. These are tools that we've been integrating incrementally in our reports. This graphic, for example, shows the breakdown of the sort of target end dates that we want to see occur in the Colombian Peace Accord. So you'll see here that in 2026 and 2031, we see the largest concentration of indicators. That's not to say that there's not implementation occurring today, just that those are sort of the major concentrations of end dates. There's also the CIPO platform that came out last year that allows us to do a more in-depth analysis of the framework plan. So for example, in this graphic, you see what implementation looks like today, what kind of reporting is occurring from government agencies on different aspects and points. Notably in 2019, for example, of the 26 indicators that needed to wrap up, we see that almost half of them were incomplete. Something similar has occurred in 2020, but we understand that the government is working on closing these gaps. And so there's a lot of information being generated around key aspects of the Accord, so that makes our work very exciting.
Thank you, Patrick. So you briefly mentioned the gender and ethnic dimensions there, but could you dive into a little bit more the details of the gender, ethnic, and the territorial provisions, as those are the three transversal axes, right? Cross-cutting through the whole Accord. And can you provide a little bit more detail on how those three were doing during 2020?
Absolutely. I mean, these three approaches that we've begun to monitor, or that we began monitoring years ago, are based on two different submatrices in the case of gender and ethnic. So in the gender matrix, we study 130 stipulations, in the ethnic matrix, 80 stipulations across the entire Accord. And so the report goes into more detail, but I'll just go over some basic findings. In the ethnic approach, we found that main progress was made during the period of 2020 in specific areas like the special consultation mechanisms, the IANPE, which is a very important component of the Accord that's found in point 6, that sort of does a really thorough job of monitoring the ethnic related indicators, especially in the framework implementation plan. But we also found challenges, the coordination of ethnic plans for substitution, security guarantees, which is sort of a theme that we found across the ethnic and gender and territorial approaches, and as well as additional resources that are needed for a lot of these programs. We found some main opportunities under the ethnic approach. The report presents some opportunities for the Ministry of Interior to develop a legal framework for prior consent and consultation, and then the Territorial Renovation Agency and IANPE should continue working with the consolidation of technical plans for the PMI indicators, as well as for the substitution program. And finally, the allocation of technical and financial resources for the special harmonization program. And then with regard to the gender approach, we have, as I mentioned earlier, a lower gap, a smaller gap with regard to implementation in the gender compared to the general implementation levels, and found important progress in points 1 and 4, especially with the national plans that include now, many include now gender focus. And in crop substitution as well, we saw that the introduction of a gender protocol for substitution programs. We also saw capacity building for the implementing entities, in gender questions, and also participation really increased during this period for the transitional justice system. We also have challenges, of course. The access to land is a big challenge for the Accord. The land fund has not distributed as many credits as it has for men. And we also see delays in the implementation of transformational commitments. And some main opportunities that we also find and present in the report are directed to the Ministry of Interior to help to improve security conditions for social leaders. The Territorial Renewal Agency to prioritize PEDET and PISDA initiatives that have specific gender tags, as well as the transitional justice system. We consider the suggestion of opening a specific macro case for sexual violence cases. And finally, in terms of territorial implementation, we saw a very important movement towards incorporating the Accord's content into territorial development plans. So about a third of all PEDET initiatives were included in different departmental and municipal plans for the period of 2020 to 2024. And we saw some capacity building occurring as well over 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic produced additional restrictions on participation, especially in rural areas that are afflicted by low connectivity and other accessibility problems. And insecurity has been a consistent risk for implementation. But we also found some important opportunities to really strengthen territorial implementation. For example, the territorial dialogue on that can occur through the departmental and municipal peace councils. Those present sort of a hub of activity that could really revive and lead the way for territorial implementation, as well as technical support for different ethnic authorities, local groups, in this sort of national and territorial approach.
Thank you, Patrick. So now that we went over the three cross-cutting approaches of the Accord, let's dive briefly into short summaries of the main advances, delays, and challenges of each of the points. Danielle, getting back to you. Can you do that, please, for point 1, 2, and 3?
Yes, of course. As I mentioned previously, point 1 shows one of the most important progresses, especially on reducing the number of not initiated commitments. This means an important progress in reducing those commitments that were lagging behind, mainly related to the implementation or the approval of the 16 plans for the route that are plans focused on providing health, education, electricity to rural areas in the prioritized municipalities for the peace agreement. We have already 9 of those plans, but in the report, since we have a period of analysis until December 2020, we already have 7 of those plans on that report. Another important aspect in terms of progresses was that the cadastre in 11 municipalities progress. The cadastre is the mechanism in order to facilitate the land organization, the land titling, so people can have access to land and also have the property of those lands to have access, for example, to the banking system to obtain loans and be able to increase the value of those territories. This is critical for the rural reform as a whole. But we already saw some important challenges, and most of those challenges are the possibility to be able to achieve a very ambitious goal that the government includes within the National Development Plan, especially related to the cadastre, because the goal is to have almost 7% of the whole municipalities with cadastre implemented, and this is going to require a lot of effort and resources, and especially to progress faster in this specific aspect. And also the implementation of the rest of the critical in a situation that we are living right now, where rural territories are more affected, for example, for the pandemic, and a plan related to health will be crucial for these territories. In terms of the main opportunities that we identify in point 1, we prioritize 3 specific aspects, and the first one has to do with the completing those 9 plans that are pending and move forward with the existing ones, because we have already adopted the plans, but the implementation hasn't started as a full speed. A second aspect has to do with the plans with the development plans with a territorial approach that need to be boosted by synergies between the different responsible entities in order to achieve this important goal that has to do with more than 30,000 initiatives that has to be implemented in 170 municipalities. And finally, the necessity to accelerate the recuperation of lands for the land fund. This fund has to reach 3 million hectares of land to be distributed between rural communities and campesino communities. And this process is going to take very long time. So we need to speed up that process, and especially continue to increasing the number of hectares within that specific land fund. With relation to point 2, which is political participation, we continue to see this concern because the few progress that this point displays. As you see, there were some progresses related to mostly technical commitments, like the approval of some of the peace broadcasting stations for within the peace agreement, and also the approval of the new electoral code, which includes, for example, gender equality, which is one of the indicators included in the peace agreement. But the most robust and transformational mechanisms within this point continue time. And as I mentioned also previously, as the point includes also, for example, mechanisms like the National Political Pact to avoid violence in politics that will be very useful in this specific moment. In terms of the opportunities that we identify in this point, especially to mechanisms to reactivate the participatory commitments. This is very important because each of the points of the peace agreement created different participatory instances, and this will be a possibility to address some of the difficulties that are occurring in the different points of the agreement, especially in the period implementation, but also in the implementation of the substitution of illicit crops. And another important aspect is to coordinate with institutions responsible for meeting transparency commitments in point 2. And finally, design and implement public policies for citizen participation and social dialogue and conflict management. And finally, in point 3, which is the end of conflict, we saw progresses related to the inclusion of reincorporation policy within various territorial development plans. This is very important because most of the former combatants now are living in more than 500 municipalities around the country, and having this policy included within these plans it's important to provide services to this group of people. And also there has been an important progress in terms of reducing the numbers of municipalities clear from the suspicion of anti-personnel mines and unexploded devices. This is very important also for providing security in rural areas. We continue to see an important challenge that is mainly related to security for former combatants. We know, but the UN mission verification mission identify 73 killed former combatants last year, and this is a critical issue to address. But here we also see important challenges in terms of guaranteeing access to goods and services in different ETCRs, outside the ETCRs, which are the areas where former combatants are concentrated right now. And finally, in terms of opportunities for this point, we highlight the necessity to promote the construction of individual and collective reincorporation roadmaps to facilitate the reincorporation process, and also to lead socioeconomic and reincorporation in alignment with territorial transformation activities. This is important also for facilitate social reincorporation of former combatants. And finally, to promote territorial political pacts, as I mentioned before, will boost the possibility to reduce, for example, stigmatization of this population in different parts of the country.
Thank you, Danielle. So as we all see, there's a lot of detail under each of the points. The report has much more. The link to the report is already in the question and answer section. We now continue with point 4, 5, and 6. So Brenda, can you please summarize the main advances, delays, challenges, and opportunities for point 4, 5, and 6? Thank you.
Well, for point 4, the report highlights as main progress that 97% of the hectares registered under the National Comprehensive Program for the Substitution of Crops Used for Illicit Purposes, known as PENIS, had illicit use crops effectively removed. On the other hand, 735 mental health and substance abuse services were set up in 31 territories. Also, the report highlights the coordination of a regional level dialogue entitled Good Practices and Lessons Learned on Drug Policy and Development in the Americas. Among the main challenges, the report identified that included more families and growers living in national parks in drug substitution programs, warranting differential ethnic plans, gender protocol, and a substitution model for families growing illicit crops that are not eligible for PENIS program, and ensuring differential criminal treatment for small growers. Among the main opportunities, for example, local and regional authorities supported by the national government through the Territorial Renewal Agency and the Office of the Presidential Counselor for Stabilization and Consolidation, ministries and agencies could implement PIS-DAPEDET and immediate action plan community initiatives in PENIS hubs. Also, is important to introduce legislation on differential criminal treatment for small illicit crop growers in order to improve legal security during the voluntary substitution process, and it's also necessary to legally formalize the National Comprehensive Intervention Program against drug consumption. Well, about point 5, among the new progress, the report highlights that members of the former FARC-EP submitted before the Special Jurisdiction for Peace 45 applications for reparation activities certification, known as TOAR in Spanish. These actions are aimed at contributing to the reparation of victims of the armed conflict. Also was important the configuration of the final report editorial board of the Truth Commission, entity which will conclude its mandate on November, the launch of the national search plan and the design of 14 regional search plans by the unit for the search for persons persons deemed as missing in the context and due to the armed conflict. Also was important that the victims' law and its ethnic decrees were extended for 10 years, a milestone for the millions of victims of the armed conflict awaiting for reparations in Colombia. Among the main challenges, the Truth Commission faced difficulties accessing information from some state entities. Also, as of November 30, 2020, the unit for the search for persons deemed as missing had not established timelines or stages for the execution of the National Search Plan, and the collective reparation plans remain low compared to the number of victims awaiting reparations. Among the main opportunities, for example, the report highlights that established precise goals and timelines for the National Search Plan will contribute to the search of persons deemed as missing in the context and due to the armed conflict. The design of a strategy to collect more testimonials from all armed conflict actors is crucial for the final report of the Truth Commission, and to guarantee access to all information requested by the Truth Commission for the fulfillment of its mandate is also fundamental for the final report. About point 6, the main progress with regard to the agreement's financing strategies, the report states that the Joint Body for Administration and Decision Making for Peace approved 178 projects, and also Congress approved an advance payment of 4.5 trillion Colombian pesos from the General Royalty System for ACOR implementation. Another important advances were that the special high-level forum with ethnic peoples received financing, and the implementation of the integrated information system for post-conflict. The main challenges are that limitations in financial resources for peace building activities remain. The Commission for the follow-up, promotion, and verification of the final agreement continue. It meeting periodically, however, parties do not often engage in constructive dialogue or compromise on key issues. The ethnic chapter is still experiencing significant delays in areas including differential plans for pennies and the reincorporation of ex-combatants. The main opportunities, or some of the main opportunities, are that CCV could strengthen internal dialogue for annual review of the PMI and promote implementation at the territorial level. The National Planning Department and the Office of the Presidential Counselor for Stabilization and Consolidation could develop joint strategies to improve the frequency and quality of the CIPA reports by entities responsible for implementation and integrate budget tracking tools. And finally, the Office of the Presidential Counselor for Stabilization and Consolidation could improve cooperation between the IAMPE and state entities responsible for execution of ethnic indicators in the agreement to comply with the ethnic chapter.
Thank you, Brenda. And just a final question to you about this. So going forward, which commitments should be prioritized given the implementation status you observed at the end of 2020?
Well, it is crucial to prioritize those commitments that engage or deal with the two most significant challenges that face the implementation in 2020. So focus primarily on all the measures directed to prevent and guarantee the life and integrity of people in the process of reincorporation, human rights defenders, and social and environmental leaders. Second, prioritize those measures that the agreement has considered to reduce inequality and vulnerability in the territories which were heightened by the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, the report finds that for the third consecutive year, the greatest delays were observed in point 2, as well as interregulatory adjustments necessary for implementation of the agreement. During this period, there were still gaps in the issuance of some legal framework necessary to comply with provisions in the final agreement. So we believe that it is urgent to build and execute a legal implementation agenda. And on this point, the Barometer Initiative team analysis on the legal implementation of the Peace Accord, which is one of the annexes to these reports, can be very valuable. About point 2, it is important to prioritize those commitments that would allow further advancements toward reforms to strengthen democracy. This involves guarantees for citizen participation, political electoral reform, reform of participatory and democratic planning, and the special transitory peace voting districts. It is essential also that the implementation agencies prioritize actions to reduce the lag between cross-current approaches implementation and the general implementation.
Thank you, Brenda. And before diving into the questions we received from our audience, a last one to Josefina. Josefina, going forward, what are the most important general opportunities for the Peace Accord implementation identified in this report?
Yes, thank you, Gerard. I think that, you know, we were speaking at the beginning about these new governments at the municipal and at the departmental level, at the state level, so to speak. We think that it's really important to make sure that they have all the resources to make their plans become a reality. So to bring them to fruition between 2020 and 2023, especially in those regions that we call in Spanish PEDET, those regions where we have these special development plans that were prioritized from the very beginning as regions for prioritized implementation. That's one of the most important ones. We also want to, you know, as we're giving the information on the framework plan for implementation, we also want everyone who is listening to us and all the different agencies and the citizenry to look at the PMI indicators, those indicators that should finalize in 2021, and make sure that we really move those indicators forward, because as we were hearing at the beginning from Patrick, if we're not able to do that in 2021, this is going to carry negative consequences for all the other indicators finishing in years down the road. There are some of the indicators in the framework plan that don't have a technical card still, and like a technical route for completion, and we really should be looking at that, trying to figure out how to make that happen. We, of course, saw that the COVID-19 pandemic was impacting the context of implementation very much. We see that it has had a differentiated effect based on gender and based on ethnicity and based on geography. And what we see is an amazing opportunity to issue especially health plans, for example, that bring together the maps of implementation, the priorities of the final Accord 2016, with the maps where we see the biggest concentration of vulnerabilities and communities that require additional help because of COVID-19. This is something that we all are facing in different ways around the world, and we're hoping that we're able to use this to the best of our abilities to push forward implementation in those already vulnerable regions and communities. We have, as here in our PowerPoint, the fourth opportunity, and you know, our audience has been listening already a couple of times to this agenda or this list of norms and laws and decrees and resolutions that we said, okay, at the beginning of the implementation process, we thought this would move through the fast track process. It didn't move through that. Many of them come from that history. And we now have a very clear picture of what needs to be supported and strengthened by different legislative bodies. So we are very happy to see last week the Constitutional Court approved the special districts for peace. And these are seats in the Congress that for 2 consecutive periods, we're going to see representatives of victims and different vulnerable populations having a special seat in Congress. We're really happy about it. You would still find this as one of those pending decisions from the year 2020, but we're very much looking forward to moving those implementation rates forward. And last but not least, we also see in this 4th and 5th year of implementation how much we have learned about weaving networks, about working together in the territories, creating these local and global networks, of what we would call more, in a more scholarly vein, these infrastructures for peace. All these people working together, organizations working together, making the implementation actually successful. And we see an incredible potential here if we're able to couple this with offices of the church, with the territorial councils for peace, the territorial councils for peace and reconciliation. We have more than 500 already constituted in Colombia. We need to strengthen them. We need to support them. This would be excellent opportunities also for dialogue and consensus building. And we see that they are playing an incredible big role in implementation, but we also see potential for making this even better. So these are some of the opportunities that our readers will also find in the fifth report, which is already available online.
Thank you very much, Josefina. So what we will do now is we received a couple of questions prior already to the webinar, because people had the opportunity to send us questions, and we got some of them on Facebook and here during the webinar. So we have tried to consolidate some of those, and we'll try in this last 25 minutes to evacuate as much as we can. So I ask all my colleagues here on the panel to please be short, 1.5 minutes, if possible, for each of these questions. Some of them are complicated questions, so we understand the challenge to answer them that shortly, but at the same time, we want to be inclusive and try to include as many questions as we got. First one, Danielle, I will give it to you. What progress did you observe in the PADET? And did you observe differences in PADET implementation among regions in Colombia? Also, to what extent are the development plans, so at the municipal and the departmental level, development plans of the new authorities, picking up on these PADET?
Yes, I'm going to start by the end of your question. And I think one of the main interesting progresses has been, as we mentioned, the inclusion of these PADET initiatives within the development plans in more than 100 municipalities in Colombia. However, one of the reports, according to the official information from the national government, is that around 17% of the 30,000 initiatives for the PADET has been already in the stage of initiation or execution. This is important, of course, and there are some differences between the different regions. We have seen that there are some regions like the Urabá, Antioqueño, and also in Chocó and in Cauca that displays some kind of delays, but they are lagging behind of the national percentage. They are between 12 and 9%, while the general implementation at the national level is 17%, as I mentioned. We want to highlight the importance of the participation of civil society and achieving the inclusion of these initiatives within the development plan. That is something that we need to give acknowledgement and recognition to the effort that civil society did in order to achieve this important goal last year. So that's, like, in general terms, how PADET is progressing. And we also have the numbers and the amount of money invested in these initiatives and the different aspects that we consider more relevant, that you can see more in detail in the report.
Thank you, Danielle. The next question is more related to point 2 of the accord. Brenda, I will send it to you. What challenges did citizen participation face due to the COVID-19 public health crisis? And how did agencies and organizations adapt to these challenges, given that citizen participation is central to implementation?
Well, the report highlights that the pandemic of COVID-19 has caused obstacles for guaranteed participation to the entire population, especially women and ethnic peoples. because when moving to virtuality, the lack of internet connectivity of this population became evident. Likewise, the participation forums created by the agreement, such as the territorial peace councils, or those that should be strengthened by the agreement, such as the territorial planning councils, had to adapt to virtuality. These instances have continued to function during the pandemic, but with multiple challenges. One of them was the difficulty in discussing territorial development plans, which forced the Ministry of the Interior to extend the deadlines for this discussion. And also the various entities related to participatory issues unintentionally privileged younger people or people located in urban areas with greater access to internet and connection equipment. So all of this led to a change or reduction of participation. This is why it's so important that implementing entities ensure participation in the midst of the pandemic.
Thank you, Brenda. The next question, a couple of them that we have consolidated, is about the security guarantees for the former FARC combatants. So Danny, can you please explain what the status of implementation of those guarantees to protect their life and integrity was at the end of the report, so at the end of 2020?
Sure. The peace agreement includes more than 70 commitments in order to provide security for former combatants. Some of them has been implemented already. Most focus on providing security to the different spaces for concentration after the laying down of arms, and those mechanisms have been working very well in terms of protecting former combatants in those spaces. However, since most of the former combatants are like 90% are already outside those spaces, security has become more complicated to provide. There is an integral system for the protection for former combatants, and some parts of this system is working and has been implemented, especially within the National Protection Unit, providing more than 1,000 bodyguards in order to create the security mechanisms. However, there are things that are missing, like the integral protection plan that need to be developed in order to provide more integral mechanisms, as the name said. So not just given material protection mechanisms, but also in material, like prevention strategies and also other assistance in terms of when people has been victimized. And an important aspect is related to the implementation of the policy in order to dismantle criminal organization that is missing within the National Commission for Security Guarantees. That also is key to prioritize to achieve that goal of protecting former combatants.
Thank you. Thanks for turning off the camera, Danny, because your connection was a little bit unstable, but now we hear you very well. We also have a good question on point 4. Patrick, this one is good for you. The question is it even possible to make progress with implementation under point 4, which is crop substitution, if implementation of point 1, which is integrated rural reform, is not progressing sufficiently, as you guys show in the report?
That's a great question, and it brings up sort of one of the characteristics of the accord and the design that we come to understand about the accord, that it's a very holistic, integrated agreement with a lot of interdependent moving parts. So points 1 and 4 indeed are very similar in certain aspects. They're both territorial in scope. They both look at rural transformation and bringing about more support for communities that have historically been afflicted by violence and other negative tendencies. So in this case, points 1 and 4 overlap, for example, with the PADET program. So this program is present in almost all of the substitution municipalities. So of the 56 municipalities, 48 are also targeted by the PADET program, meaning they receive or they go through a planning process and receive a lot of the responsibilities of carrying out the initiatives outlined in the PADET program. So in that sense, to the extent that PADET is advancing, PennEast municipalities are also affected by that. Another form of interconnection are the national plans. So you can imagine in a lot of substitution municipalities, it's important for these families now growing other crops to be able to access the market, to make sure that they can make sustainable subsistent living. So it's important for the national plans in irrigation and road systems to really advance in order for these communities to prosper. And there are certain mechanisms under PennEast that provide immediate action for these families, but it's always important to keep in mind the sustainability of these programs that the Accord calls for.
Great, thank you, Patrick. We have another question on point 5. Brenda, you may want to answer this one. How did participation of victims progress during 2020, especially under the integrated system for truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition? So how did victims' participation advance under the transitional justice system?
Well, the Truth Commission included, listened, and allowed participation of victims through the collection of testimonies, the submission of reports, the realization of encounters for truth and listening spaces, which were really important for victims. The unit for the search for persons deemed as missing warranted the victims' participation in the construction of the national search plan and throughout the search process, for example, by receiving search requests and receiving reports, and by recognizing especially that victims' relatives are fundamental in the search process. Before the special jurisdiction for peace, we have observed victims' participation in the different procedural instances through the submission of reports, highlighting the creation of the participatory manual that provides clear guidelines on how to ensure that the participation of victims is effective. Also, the victims unit work close with victims abroad in order to elaborate 2 important studies about them and how the armed conflict affect them. All of this is explained in detail in the section of the point 5 of the report. And also the report states that efforts should be made to continue to guarantee participation, especially at the territorial level.
Thank you, Brenda. A brief question here to Danny. I forgot if we explained it at the beginning, but there is a question about what kind of impact do you think your reports and your monitoring is making on decision makers? So with who and how do you share your monitoring information and analysis?
Yes, Gerard, according to our mandate, we deliver these reports, both the comprehensive and also the new ones that we are producing, the bi-monthly reports, to the both parts in CCV, which are government and also the FARC components or already comunes, and also the international component entities. However, we also publicly present these reports that we are doing right now, and we do it with the international community and different allies of the implementation at the territorial level, like civil society organizations, the academia, and also with the private sector. So we try to reach these different groups so they can be on board with the implementation and receive very technical information from our side. And finally, we have a permanent dialogue with the different institutions responsible for the implementation in order to provide in real-time information so they can improve in their planning of the different indicators according to our suggestions.
Thank you, Danielle. A question about the role of the international community, Josefina. How important is the role of the international community and of other non-governmental sectors in the implementation process?
Well, of course, the role of the international community has been central and essential before the signing of the agreement, during the negotiations, but also supporting the peace agreement, either as part of the international component of verification like we are, or just surrounding and making sure that also the implementation has enough resources to be realized and to be brought to life. We have, of course, in Colombia, a multi-trust fund, but more important than that is also, I think, as we are entering the 5th year of implementation, to have the role of the international community, the friends of peace in Colombia, to make sure that we're reminded all the time about the essential role that the implementation plays also overall in the stabilization of the country. So yeah, absolutely, not just political support, but also financial support. And one very important aspect that we also see when we look at the realities of these programs of implementation on the ground is the technical support that they're providing in different regions through, all sorts of trainings, all sorts of making sure that there is the technical ability and capabilities, especially in the territories, in the rural areas, to be able to match all the commitments that we made in 2016.
Thank you, Josefina. And so we've also gotten some questions, of course, about the current situation in Colombia, and especially about the situation of the social and political protests and their relation with the accord implementation. So Josefina, how can further accord implementation contribute to a solution to the protests Colombia is facing currently? And what should be done? What are you as the Kroc Institute and the Barometer Initiative suggesting to further advance those objectives of the final accord that could also contribute to solutions for the protest situation in Colombia? Now, it's a complex question. But...
Yes, we know we're impartial monitors of the implementation of the agreement. So we don't really have a role in the current negotiations. But what we see is also how the implementation of the agreement overall internationally and in the trajectories in other countries have really contributed in a decisive way to create much better conditions to be able to transform conflicts in a nonviolent way. And this is in a way what we're always hoping with the peace agreement implementation. The peace agreement gives us a platform. And this platform is an institutional platform where will be able to transform conflicts through peaceful means. It means this is a reinforcement of democracy. It is a reinforcement of political voices, of representation, etc. And we are sure, we were listening throughout the webinar about the necessity to fully implement, for example, the provisions of point 2, which is about political participation, make sure that we are moving ever closer to have democratic encounters and democratic dialogues that are based on non-stigmatization. This means having the ability to listen to each other and not just ascribe a particular characteristic of an affiliation or a former affiliation to a certain party, etc., to dismiss other people's opinions. So what we're seeing here is that a lot of the commitments of the peace agreement of 2016 can really provide a wonderful space for not only dialogues in general, but also building consensus. And we need to be able to see how the peace agreement was trying to precisely not only stop the violence, the direct violence that we were seeing throughout the war, but really tackle those underlying causes of violence, the historical causes of violence, and of course the structural causes of violence, in order to provide solutions that are long-lasting, provide solutions that give us, as we were saying before, the opportunity to speak differently, to have a plural understanding of democracy without resorting to violent means.
Okay, that is very interesting. So we are of course aware that there are some changes in the national government related to all these protests, and we will see how that evolves. But here is a very interesting last question on Danny. I'm going to send this to you one. Okay, I'm going to read straightforward here from the webinar question and answer question. In December 2019, there was a national meeting of representatives of local councils for peace and reconciliation in Bogota. One of the main concerns was that these councils had no budget, no vote, no real representation or mechanisms to influence regional and local administrations' decisions. Okay, some have not even been convened yet at the local level. However, you guys at the Kroc Institute, at the Barometer, seem to see these councils, the peace councils at the municipal and departmental level, as a good opportunity to further point two of political and citizen participation. Could you elaborate on this briefly, Danny?
Sure. Well, the peace councils are a very interesting instance in order to promote participation at the territorial level. There has been more than 500 of them created so far. The Peace Commissioner Office has doing an important effort in order to create this, to support the creation of these councils in order to provide part of the budget. But of course, we highlighted in previous reports, this is one of the main challenges for these instances, is having the capacity, not just financial, but also technical, to create more robust plans for promoting implementation at the territorial level. And this has been addressed by different entities. For example, there has been support from the international community in order to increase the technical capacity of these councils. But we understand that there are several participatory mechanisms in Colombia, and the peace councils need to gain a space within that myriad of instances. And this will be an opportunity, especially focused on the implementation of the peace agreement. So having the leadership of local administrations in order to strengthening the capacity of these councils, for example, to be an overseeing body to provide, as his name says, consultancy for the local administration in how to include, for example, the commitments of the peace agreement within the local plans, and how to articulate with other initiatives at the local level will be critical. But of course, budget is an important aspect and need to be strengthening. But we think that this is going to be more in the hands of local authorities, because local peace councils are also in charge of the mayors and governors at the territorial level.
Thank you, Danny. We are running out of time. We have 1 minute left. Thank you all for listening. I will give the word to Josefina for closing remarks. Please remember, you can find our reports on our website of the Kroc Institute. All questions, please reach out. You can find us in Colombia on campus, by all means, always available to help you. Thank you to our supporters. Thank you to all people committed to the implementation of the peace accord in Colombia. Josefina, the closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for staying with us. Many of you have also been with us yesterday in our Spanish launch and now in the English one. We're very, very happy that you're here, that you're listening to us. We really hope that the information provided in our report is useful to all of you, not only to be able to realize that we also have not just responsibility, but agency in the implementation of the peace agreement. We're one of the of the luckiest institutes of peace studies around the world with this mandate. We are deeply thankful to all of you who have supported us throughout the years, and also, of course, for the trust of the signatory parties that continue listening to us and following our reports and our work and providing information. As Asher was saying at the very beginning, we wouldn't be able to do this, of course, without the commitment and the hard work of everyone at the University of Notre Dame, but also of the Barometer Initiative in Colombia. So I would like to also echo those words, saying thank you very much to all the members of our Barometer Initiative in Colombia. We will be there in June, and we're very much looking forward to be able to see you all in person and celebrate the 5th Comprehensive Report on Implementation. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.